Hi guys, welcome to Midnight Anime Library. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel grow. Your support means everything, so hit that button and let me know what you want to see next. Please ignore images. God Valley broadcast when the future exposed the strongest pirates. Part 2 Chapter 11 Ace's demise. 3 top powerhouses directly break down. Seeing Ace get sent flying, Roger couldn't help but frown. Although he was expending stamina, Ace and this admiral were not on the same level. Devil fruit abilities countering each other was one thing, but individual capability was another. Ace was completely suppressed. Roger, your son truly makes one feel heartache. The young Whitebeard saw Ace protecting himself so fiercely, and a smile appeared on his lips. He was genuinely happy. Hearing Whitebeard's words, Roger nodded symbolically, but then he quickly turned his gaze to the sky screen. His intuition told him that something bad might happen soon. This feeling lingered in Roger's heart, making him feel very heavy, and the arm holding Shanks and Shamrock tightened slightly. Noticing Roger's expression suddenly becoming so serious, Whitebeard also put away his smile and stared intently at the screen. Looking at Ace kneeling before Sakazuki, Whitebeard suddenly felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest for some reason, and Garp, who was sitting on the ground beside him, felt the same. The three powerhouses connected to Ace, as if by telepathy, sensed something abnormal about Ace's current situation. The result of this clash ended with Sakazuki's victory. Ace's flames were strong, but Sakazuki's magma was stronger. 1 foot taller, the devil is 10 feet taller. Ace, exhausted, knelt painfully before Sakazuki. Seeing Ace in trouble, Luffy wanted to go forward to rescue him, but his body was already on the verge of collapse. Before he could take 2 steps, his legs gave out. A card flew out from Luffy's embrace. This was the Vivre card Ace had given Luffy. Luffy wanted to grab it, but his hands also began to disobey him, leaving him completely unable to move. At this moment, Sakazuki noticed Luffy's situation. He didn't immediately continue attacking Ace, but instead looked at Luffy, who was kneeling there, with murderous intent. Akainu's roar exploded like thunder, every word carrying the scorching hatred of magma. The Pirate King's bloodline, the Revolutionary Army Dragon's bloodline, you two are actually sworn brothers. Roger is dead, but Dragon is still alive. All you evil bloodlines should be completely eradicated. The air on the battlefield instantly solidified. Sakazuki's eyes, burning with absolute justice, locked onto Luffy, filled with deep hatred for the era of pirates. The Pirate King's bloodline connected through Ace, and the Revolutionary Dragon's bloodline surged through Luffy's veins. To Sakazuki, this was a double unforgivable offense. Anyone else can escape, but you and Straw Hat must die. Sakazuki's voice was like a summons from hell. The magma around him began to boil, and the pungent smell of sulfur permeated the air. His right arm had completely turned into magma, and scorching drops of lava fell to the ground, making sizzling sounds again and burning out one charred pit after another. Ace immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. He quickly turned, trying to retreat with Luffy before Sakazuki could attack. But Sakazuki's speed was beyond imagination. He accurately anticipated Ace's movements, feinted, and then, with astonishing explosive power, bypassed Ace and lunged at the exhausted Luffy. Luffy! Ace screamed in horror, watching helplessly as the deadly magma fist drew closer to his brother. Time stretched infinitely at this moment. Luffy's body, exhausted from overwork, couldn't dodge at all. He could only watch as death approached. Behind him, Jinbe, Ivankov, and others tried their best to rush forward to rescue him, but the distance was too great, and there was simply no time. At this critical moment, Ace, without thinking, instantly made the most important decision of his life. I will never let you harm my brother. Ace roared, his body bursting forth with unprecedented speed. The tattoo of the Whitebeard pirates on his back was particularly striking, a symbol of his true belonging, proof of the home he had found in this world. In an instant, Ace had flashed in front of Luffy, using his back to shield Luffy from this devastating blow. Sakazuki's magma fist mercilessly pierced through Ace's chest, the scorching magma making a horrifying sound as it met flesh and blood. The red beads Ace wore on his chest were shattered by the immense impact, scattering like his rapidly fading life. The Vivre card slowly began to burn at this moment. Damn it! Seeing Ace's Vivre card in his chest being pierced, Roger seemed to lose control, and his conqueror's haki began to unleash. Many Marine soldiers caught in this haki instantly fainted. Garp's heart was almost shattered seeing Ace in that state, but he still stood up and protected the innocent Marines behind him. Roger, calm down. Garp protected the Marine soldiers while scolding Roger. At this moment, those Marines were too scared to speak, only daring to hide behind Garp. And the celestial dragons didn't dare to make a sound, already hiding behind Garand Saint, trembling with fear. Roger, you really need to calm down. Yes, that strange thing said we couldn't show killing intent. Seeing Roger somewhat out of control, Rayleigh and Jabba began to soothe his emotions, but Roger was trembling all over, and tears had already started to well up. Although he and Ace had never met or spoken, Roger could feel an extreme sorrow. This feeling was unprecedented. Wah! Shanks saw Roger's tears and reached out to wipe them away. When he realized he couldn't, the little boy also started crying. Strangely, only Shanks cried with Roger. His brother Shamrock was completely unaffected, watching the scenery outside alone. Don't cry, I'm fine. Listening to Shanks' cries and seeing his tears, Roger bit his lip, still reining in some of his haki. I'm fine. I just don't know why, but I suddenly felt very sad just now, suddenly wanted to cry. Roger comforted Shanks. Although his tears had stopped, his tone still revealed how terribly bad Roger's mood was at the moment. Ha! Seeing Roger in such a state, Rox turned around and took a deep look at Whitebeard, who was holding the Komajiri beside him. Whitebeard's back was very tall, but Rox was a bold and meticulous person. He still noticed the slight trembling of the other party's body. New gate. Rox handed Teach to Alice, then stepped forward and patted Whitebeard's shoulder. Roger, who had never even met Ace, had this reaction. One can only imagine what kind of feelings Whitebeard was hiding beneath his calm exterior at this very moment. Chapter 12, Bonds. At this moment, Whitebeard in God Valley saw Ace's condition and felt a deep pain in his heart, as if something precious had been lost. Perhaps it's because the future Newgate and this Firefist Ace share a strong bond, which is why he feels such immense pain seeing this scene now. Stussy naturally noticed Whitebeard's abnormality and began to softly explain the situation. Roger and Garp's earlier reactions also fit this condition. Roger entrusted Ace to Garp, so Garp's feelings for Ace were also extremely deep. As for Roger, there's no need to mention it. Even if Ace had never met Roger since birth, the link between father and son is unbreakable. Hearing Stussy's explanation, everyone present agreed. At this point, only this situation could explain the unusual reactions of Roger, Garp, and Whitebeard. Such base emotions, they are merely pirates. Garand Saint watched this scene and sneered dismissively. So-called bonds would all become weaknesses, therefore, Garand Saint always treated Shanks and Shamrock as mere tools. However, seeing his own child so close to Roger just now, Garand Saint's mood was still very bad. Just as Ace was escaping from the rear with Luffy, and just as Ace knelt to bid farewell to Whitebeard, adhering to his decision to stay and cover them, back then, the streamers who just got into the game all thought that this ending would be the best solution for this war, but Akainu's sudden words made Ace stop, and the killing intent directed at Luffy made Ace rush towards his fated end. Under the mockery and attack of Marineford's highest fighting power, Ace was ultimately pierced through his body and fell into Luffy's arms. At this moment, Ace's Vivre card began to burn wildly, indicating that Ace had no chance of survival. God Valley, Marineford War, everyone watched this scene. The Garp of both eras had their pupils trembling, Roger's body shook, and the young Whitebeard gripped Komajiri so tightly that his fingertips turned white. Roger, your son is truly a good older brother. He saved this straw hat boy twice in total. The first time was from Blackbeard's pursuit, and the second time is this. Golden Lion Shiki looked at Roger and Ace on the screen with a serious expression. Normally, he would have made a joke, but now he couldn't utter a single witty remark. Seeing Ace get hit, all the pirates were shocked. They turned and charged towards Sakazuki. 1st Division Commander Marco, however, was bound by sea stone handcuffs, making him unable to break free. Seeing Marco's appearance and hairstyle, in an inconspicuous corner of God Valley, a pirate stared intently at everything. Cannon fire roared, bullets flew, pirates unleashed all their firepower on Sakazuki. Although the momentum was immense, after the smoke cleared, Sakazuki's body wounds had slowly healed. Such tenacious vitality. You're still not dead even at this point? Fire Fist Ace. Sakazuki once again stood before the two brothers. Seeing that Ace was still breathing, he raised his right fist again, ready to deliver the final death blow to both of them. Just then, the elderly Whitebeard noticed the situation over there. He prepared to use his ability to stop Sakazuki. But in that instant, a laser beam directly penetrated his arm. Just as the fist was about to strike, Knight of the Sea Jinbe blocked Sakazuki's fatal blow. Jinbe's face was resolute. Even if he died, he would not let Sakazuki continue his assault. Marco could only watch anxiously, and at this moment, the surrounding pirates brought over Mr. 3, who had just unlocked Ace's handcuffs. In this urgent situation, a marine at Marineford suddenly stood up and slowly walked towards Sakazuki. This scene was witnessed by everyone in God Valley, and everyone's gaze began to ripple. That marine was none other than the elderly Garp, whose veins were bulging on his face. Vice Admiral Garp, what are you doing? Seeing Garp walk in that direction, many Marines at Marineford swallowed hard, and the Marines in God Valley also stared blankly at the scene. Garp, you bastard. Seeing Garp lose control, Sengoku went up and immediately pinned him down. Sengoku's strength was so great that Garp's face was pressed firmly against the ground. Are you crazy? Get a grip. Looking at the trembling Garp, Sengoku understood his friend's feelings, but their respective positions did not allow Garp to act recklessly. Rather than being pinned to the ground by Sengoku, Garp was more accurately being crushed by the justice behind him. Sengoku, just hold me down like this. Otherwise, I'll kill Sakazuki. Although pinned down, Garp still glared fiercely at Sakazuki in the distance, his voice filled with a killing intent that even moved Sengoku. You idiot! Hearing Garp say such words, Sengoku broke out in a cold sweat, his arm tightening again, pressing Garp down with even more force. Jinbe blocked Sakazuki's attack, but he was already at his limit. Just as Sakazuki prepared to attack again, Marco and Vista intervened. Although the two commanders' attack did have an effect this time, Sakazuki still wore a look of mockery. What they were doing now was meaningless, and with that, Sakazuki gestured for everyone to look at Ace. Everyone turned their heads at this moment, but the next scene shocked even these battle-hardened individuals. After the flames on Ace's back disappeared, an enormous blood-filled hole was particularly striking, and the Whitebeard tattoo on his back was also completely disfigured. Holding Ace tightly, Luffy stared at the warm, crimson blood on his hands, his voice trembling. I'm sorry, Luffy. I couldn't escape my fate after all. Ace weakly leaned on Luffy's shoulder, his voice ethereal, but hearing his words, Luffy's lips quivered. Ivan, hurry and save Ace. Use your needle, quickly. Luffy frantically shouted towards the back, placing his hope in his friend who had helped him, but Ivankov stood still. I'm a doctor, I'm here. A pirate doctor from the Whitebeard pirates ran over with medical supplies. When he saw Ace's wound, his expression instantly darkened. In all his years of practicing medicine, he had never seen such a fatal wound. Luffy saw the doctor not treating Ace and desperately urged him, but Ace spoke up, interrupting Luffy. Ace knew his own condition well, most of his internal organs were gone, he was beyond saving. Luffy still couldn't believe it, he tearfully begged Ivankov to give Ace an injection. Seeing Luffy like this, Ivankov reluctantly spoke. It's no use. Straw Hat Boy, Ace is all ready. Hearing even Ivankov say this, Luffy's last hope was shattered. He loudly screamed that Ace had said he wouldn't die, tears streaming from his eyes. Chapter 13, What Ace Was Searching For. Ace. Luffy's heart-wrenching cry pierced through all the clashing of metal and furious roars on the Marineford battlefield, striking hard at everyone's hearts. The despair contained in that voice made the noisy battlefield seem to be muted for a moment. Blood, warm and viscous, continuously gushed from the hideous hole in Ace's chest, soaking Luffy's hands and staining the shattered ground beneath their feet. The faint flame Ace had ignited with his last strength to protect Luffy had now completely extinguished. Luffy could clearly feel Ace's life force rapidly slipping away, like grains of sand in his palm, irreversible. A bone-chilling cold spread slowly and steadily from his limbs to his heart. In this coldness that gradually consumed everything, Ace's consciousness was exceptionally clear. Countless fragments of the past surged into his mind like a tide, forming a long and vivid montage. The ultimate question that had plagued his entire childhood and adolescence resurfaced in the depths of his mind, distant yet incredibly clear. Was it really a good thing that I was born into this world? The floodgates of memory burst open. He saw his small, wounded self, hiding in the shadows, listening to the drunken ramblings in the tavern. Those words repeatedly pierced his young heart. Gold, Roger? That devil's son. Such evil bloodline should not exist in this world at all. His death would be a contribution to the world. The hatred and curses of the world, like heavy shackles, had firmly bound his soul since he could remember. Ace had silently cried out to the night sky and shed tears facing the vast sea. How could a child, unwanted and denied the value of his existence by the whole world, find the courage to live? No one expects my existence. In the depths of his consciousness, the lonely child whispered, I never thought of living. Ace's voice grew weaker and weaker at the boundary between reality and memory, and his body temperature was rapidly dropping. If there was any lingering regret, it was not being able to personally witness his crybaby younger brother achieve his dream of becoming the Pirate King. However, this regret didn't seem so heavy, because deep down, he firmly believed that Luffy could definitely do it. That was the brother acknowledged by Portgas D. Ace. Meanwhile, at God Valley, Gold Roger, the Pirate King who once stirred the entire world, witnessed all of this through the light screen, and could no longer maintain any semblance of his usual swagger. Tears streamed uncontrollably from his eyes, tracing paths down his resolute face. He clenched his fists, nails digging deep into his palms, his body trembling slightly from immense grief and helplessness. He had given this child life, but also bestowed upon him the world's heaviest original sin. Beside him, Garp slumped to the ground. The marine hero, known for his iron fist, seemed to have all his strength drained in an instant. He silently wiped away the dampness from the corners of his eyes. Those tears were mixed with grief for Ace's passing, heartbreak for Luffy's collapse, and helplessness over the tearing conflict between his position and his family. He had protected Ace's secret, but ultimately failed to protect Ace's life. Everyone else present was also deeply moved. Gloriosa and Stussy had tears in their eyes. Although they were pirates, the demise of this young life still filled their hearts with an indescribable bitterness. Even Big Mom Charlotte Linlin, usually so wild, fell into an unusual silence, her expression exceptionally grave. She looked at Ace, hated by the world, on the light screen, and a question arose in her heart: will my children be so detested by the world in the future? A sense of shared sorrow, as a leader of outcasts, quietly swept through her mind. Just then, the scene on the light screen abruptly switched. It took everyone back to the tranquil coast where windmills spun, on the border of the Goa Kingdom. Under the sunlight, little Ace stood at the cliff edge, hands on his hips, chest puffed out, gazing at the boundless sea. His body was covered in scars from training and fights, but his eyes shone astonishingly bright, full of longing for the future and untamed spirit. Young Luffy sat on the ground behind him, comically wearing Roger's straw hat. Listen, Luffy. Little Ace's voice, clear and firm with a boy's unique quality, said, we must live without regrets. One day, we will set sail and live as we please. He turned around, his gaze burning as he looked at Luffy, word by word, making the most solemn vow between brothers, more free than anyone else. This voice, crossing the barrier of time, echoed clearly in the depths of Ace's mind at this moment, as his life was about to burn out. The scene cut back to reality. A cold body, desperate cries, the lingering scent of blood, but Ace's lips, at this moment, struggled to form an extremely faint, yet incredibly real, curve. I have no regrets anymore. Yes, Ace suddenly understood. What he truly desired, perhaps, was never world-renowned fame, nor was it to prove his strength to anyone. He had spent his entire life, wandering, fighting in blood, seeking nothing more than the answer to the question that had constantly plagued him since childhood. What I truly want doesn't seem to be fame. Was my birth really a good thing? Actually, I just wanted to know this answer. Blood continued to spill from the corner of his mouth, and the wound on his back still dripped, but his muddled thoughts became clearer than ever in the final moments of his life. Ace saw Luffy's unreserved smile of reliance and trust. He remembered Whitebeard embracing him, giving him family and a home. He felt Marco, Izo, all his comrades fighting with all their might to save him. All of this, like scattered puzzle pieces, finally assembled the answer he had sought for decades, just before the end arrived. The deafening sounds of battle around him seemed to instantly fade away, and the world was put on pause. Ace used his last ounce of strength, lowering his voice so faintly that only Luffy, holding him tightly, could hear. He asked Luffy to convey his final words to those who loved him deeply, and whom he loved deeply in return. Tears mixed with blood, tracing paths down his dust-covered cheeks. He cried as he spoke his last words to this world, old man, everyone, and Luffy. Until now, for such a hopeless me, you have shown so much kindness. The moment his voice fell, far away on the other side of the battlefield, Whitebeard Edward Newgate, engaged in fierce combat, suddenly trembled. He seemed to sense something and abruptly turned his head. His gaze fell upon a red bead that had been strung on Ace's necklace. The string had broken, and it rolled across the blood-stained ground, clinking all the way, finally coming to rest at his feet. Whitebeard trembled, his fingers, capable of tearing the earth, now incredibly gently and carefully picked up the bead, which still carried Ace's warmth. Burning tears, no longer suppressible, streamed from the eyes of the world's strongest man. Ace used his last strength to complete his thanks, his voice as light as a sigh, yet as heavy as 1,000 tons. "Thank you so much." After saying these last words, the lines of sadness on his face completely smoothed out, and his lips struggled, yet incredibly happily, turned upwards, freezing into a relieved and contented smile. All obsessions, all pain, all unwillingness, found complete release and peace at this moment. The last speck of Ace's vivre card also scattered with the wind, signifying that he had burned out all his life's flame. His body completely lost its supporting strength, slowly slipping from Luffy's stiff embrace, and collapsing onto the cold ruins. Before his consciousness completely sank into darkness, he took one last look at this cruel yet warm world, one last look at his comrades who fought desperately for him, one last look at that towering back, like a true father. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes. Portgas Ace, commander of the Whitebeard Pirates' 2nd Division, Firefist Ace, thus, in his brother Luffy's arms, ended his short and fiery life. What a cruel future. Before the light screen, Roger watched the scene of his son falling, his emotions extremely complex. Anger, sadness, guilt, helplessness, all kinds of emotions intertwined into a huge net, tightly entangling him. He wanted to roar, to vent, but found that he couldn't even make a sound. Jabba subconsciously wanted to step forward to comfort him, but Rayleigh, standing nearby, stopped him with a hand. Rayleigh gently shook his head at him. At this moment, any words would be pale, some pain had to be chewed and digested by Roger alone. The young Garp was still sitting on the ground, but he looked as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. He no longer tried to wipe away his tears, letting them flow freely. He quietly watched the heartbreaking final scene frozen on the light screen. Free small gifts, thank you bosses. Chapter 14, Kaido, the flavor is truly strong. As you all can see, Ace ultimately failed to escape, but even in death, a smile graced Ace's lips. He accepted and faced his fate with composure. Ace was content in his final moments, the answer he had always sought was finally found, Li Fei's voice explained quietly from the side. However, the Marineford War did not end with Ace's death. The Marine side was greatly boosted in morale and began a desperate counterattack. But the most tormented person present was undoubtedly Luffy, who had gone through hell and high water yet still failed to rescue his older brother. Watching his brother, who had just fought beside him, collapse into a pool of blood, Luffy still seemed unable to accept the reality. Seeing his hands stained with Ace's blood, Luffy began to tremble. Luffy finally had no choice but to accept this reality. Luffy's heartbreaking cries showed his mind had completely broken. His body was already on the verge of collapse, and now his spirit had shattered too. Every memory of Luffy and Ace's time together as brothers flashed before Luffy's eyes. In those memories, there seemed to be another child, but that child's figure was dark, and his features were completely obscured. The three of them laughed and played together, carefree. At this moment, Garp, who was pinned to the ground, heard Luffy's cries and saw the cold corpse lying on the ground. Tears and snot poured uncontrollably down his face. There was no marine hero here. Garp was, in the end, just a helpless grandfather who couldn't save his two grandsons. With Ace's death, the bloodline of the Pirate King was completely severed. Ace! Akainu, you bastard! Avenge Ace! The surrounding Whitebeard pirates, witnessing Ace's demise, all shed bloody tears and stared at Sakazuki with rage-filled eyes. At this moment, Luffy couldn't hear anyone's voice or listen to anyone's words. He just knelt before Ace, weeping bitterly, crying so hard that blood began to seep from his mouth, yet he showed no sign of stopping. A.C.E. After shouting Ace's name one last time, Luffy's expression froze, and the sharp, miserable sound suddenly stopped dead. Ivankov, standing behind him, took in the scene. He could tell at a glance that Luffy had reached the absolute limit of his grief. His body and mind had suffered an unprecedented shock. Just as Ivankov prepared to rush forward to save him, surging magma began to erupt. Sakazuki, like a mad dog, still focused relentlessly on Luffy. Even though he had killed Ace, and even though the Whitebeard pirates' operation had failed, he was still determined to kill Luffy. To kill the bloodline that was even more dangerous than Ace's. Just as Sakazuki's magma-heavy punch, no less powerful than the one that struck Ace moments ago, was about to smash into Luffy, a blue figure instantly flashed forward, blocking the attack. The person was none other than the 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard pirates, Marco the Phoenix. I won't let you succeed again. I won't let you kill this kid. Marco bore the brunt of Sakazuki's magma, while Jinbe used the opening to carry Luffy away. Although seeing Ace on the ground felt like a knife twisting in Jinbe's heart, protecting Luffy was the top priority right now. Seeing Luffy being carried away, Sakazuki panicked. He exerted sudden force, pushing Marco back a few steps, but Marco's body remained resilient. Jinbe, quickly take Ace's younger brother away. Straw Hat's life is Ace's living will. We must protect him on Ace's behalf. If he also meets with misfortune, that will be a disgrace to the Whitebeard pirates. Marco displayed the spirit of the 1st Division commander. Following his passionate declaration, the pirates who had been weeping instantly snapped back to attention. That's right, although Ace was dead, Straw Hat was still alive. They must protect this younger brother well for Ace. At God Valley, everyone looked towards Garp, and towards Dragon, who was receiving treatment nearby. In their eyes, Sakazuki's obsession with Luffy was due to Dragon forming the Revolutionary Army and fighting those scumbags in the world government. Garp, you're truly interesting. Your son became the Revolutionary Army leader, both your grandsons became pirates, yet you insist on being a Marine. Golden Lion started running his mouth again. Although he understood Garp's position left him helpless, that didn't stop him from looking down on so-called justice. At this moment, Roger exhaled a mouthful of stale air. He had just digested all the information alone, and he had to admit the process was quite painful. As if sensing that Roger's emotions had stabilized, Little Shanks reached out his hand, wanting to play with him, a gesture that greatly amused Roger. Hey! Rayleigh, Jabba, come look. This little guy seems to really like me. Looks like I'm pretty popular with kids. Ha 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 ha. Seeing Shanks take a liking to him, Roger swept away his previous gloom and began showing off his personal charm to everyone. Although Shamrock had no interaction with Roger, Shanks did. Roger just wanted the pirates and Marines present to know. He himself was not the super bastard that rumors claimed him to be, he still had children who liked him. Watching Roger clown around, the Roger pirates, as well as Shaki and Gloriosa, were all amused, while the other important figures looked at Roger speechlessly. They hadn't known Roger for the first day. This man was occasionally very serious, and occasionally very childish. That damned pirate. Garen Saint watched Roger hold and show off his son, feeling like his lungs were about to explode from anger. This was utterly humiliating. With Roger acting so smug, anyone unfamiliar with the situation might think the child was Roger's son. The hatred of having one's child stolen and one's wife taken, both deeds had been accomplished by his Roger pirates. Garen Saint truly wished he could smash his head against a block of tofu and die now. Where did Kaido and Lin go? While Roger was being a goofball, Golden Lion suddenly realized something. He quickly turned around and looked everywhere, but the two rivals were nowhere to be seen. Rox had actually noticed their disappearance earlier. Lin had quietly ridden Zeus toward the forest behind, and Kaido had secretly followed her. Even Rayleigh going to save Shaki earlier, these things seemed unknown to others, but Rox had seen it all. Although Rox knew, he wouldn't ask questions. His wife and child had returned to his side, and he had nothing left to worry about. There are such bizarre things in this world, and I never expected we would encounter such an opportunity. At this moment, deep inside the Celestial Dragon's first prize warehouse. Taking advantage of everyone's attention being drawn to the light screen. Above the central plaza, two small figures boldly snuck into this heavily guarded location as if entering an unmanned territory. What a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity! Young Ivankov stared at the devil fruit with the strange pattern in his hand, his eyes shining with excitement. Beside him, young Kuma quietly clutched another fruit, his expression solemn yet tinged with confusion. Although we can't tell which is which, as long as we eat it, bang. Before he could finish speaking, the wall shattered. A giant hand, carrying a terrifying aura, shot straight in, instantly pinning Ivankov hard against the wall. Amidst the swirling dust, the towering figure of Charlotte Linlin slowly appeared. Mama, that was close. Big Mom restrained Ivankov with one hand and swiftly snatched the devil fruit from his grasp with the other. Her greedy gaze immediately shifted to the fruit in Kuma's palm. Hand over that one, to me as well. Eat it, quickly. Ivankov screamed through his restraints. Though Kuma didn't understand, he bit down without hesitation, and the juice of the pawpaw fruit burst between his lips and teeth. Forget it. If it's been eaten, there's nothing I can do. Big Mom clicked her tongue in displeasure, then triumphantly held up her trophy. Fortunately, I got the fish fruit. I'll take it back for Katakuri, my pirate crew needs this kind of powerful fighting force. Just as she was reveling in her victory, a fierce figure quietly rose from the shadow behind her. I'll be taking that. Bang! Kaido's full-powered kanabo smashed down with a sound that tore through the air. This sudden, heavy strike caused even Big Mom, known as the Iron Balloon, to momentarily lose consciousness. The precious fruit flew into the air, and strangely, it seemed to be calling out to Kaido. Without the slightest hesitation, Kaido leaped up and swallowed the fish fruit whole. This taste is potent. The flavor is truly strong. Swoosh. Only then did Big Mom, who had been slammed to the ground, fully regain her senses. She struggled to look up, just in time to see Kaido chewing the last bit of fruit flesh with a look of ecstasy. The fish fruit, on which she had placed such high hopes, had vanished forever into his stomach. Chapter 15, Big Mom vs. Kaido. Linlin, I'm running away. Kaido, you bastard. I'll kill you. Big Mom's roar shattered several windows in the treasure vault. Her eyes were bloodshot, fixed on the devil fruit in Kaido's hand, which already had a large bite taken out of it. Her chest heaved violently, and the terrifying aura emanating from her body caused the temperature of the entire space to plummet by several degrees. Two top-tier devil fruits were right before her eyes. She had schemed and expended all her effort, only to end up doing someone else's bidding. This sense of frustration and the rage of being ambushed by Kaido gnawed at her sanity like a venomous snake. Kaido's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed the exceptionally sweet flesh of the fruit, and a strange warm current instantly surged through his limbs and bones. He could even clearly feel some dormant power being awakened deep within his blood. Facing Linlin's man-eating gaze, he grinned somewhat sheepishly. Gula Linlin, don't be so stingy. I really have a feeling that this devil fruit, it seems to be calling to me in the dark. This wasn't entirely an excuse. The moment he ate the fruit, a bloodline-like tremor indeed seized him. My mama's sword is calling for you too. Bang! A sonic boom that tore through the air was his response. Big Mom couldn't be bothered to listen to his nonsense. In her fury, the giant blade Napoleon in her hand erupted with an unprecedentedly fierce cold light, slashing down towards Kaido's head with the simplest, most brutal vertical chop. This strike held nothing back, infused with her monstrous strength capable of shattering mountains and splitting. sees, and her boiling killing intent. Kaido's pupils suddenly contracted. Linlin was serious this time. The last trace of ease on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a solemn expression. Almost instinctively, his bulging right arm swung up his heavy spiked club, Hasaikai. Black armament haki rapidly coiled around it like a tide, directly meeting the deadly slash. Clang! The clash of sword and club no longer produced a metallic clang, but a terrifying roar like two meteorites colliding. Two immensely powerful yet distinctly different conquerors haki clashed head-on, and black-red lightning-like energy ripples exploded and burst outwards from the two of them. The sturdy ground cracked inch by inch, spreading like a spiderweb. Piles of gold and silver treasures all around were violently flung away by the invisible shockwave, clattering against the walls. The entire treasure vault shook violently, as if it could disintegrate at any moment. With one strike blocked, the madness in Big Mom's eyes intensified. Zeus! Prometheus, she shrieked. Yes, Mama! Zeus, the thundercloud above her head, swelled in response, and dazzling lightning converged within it into a searing white thunderbolt. Beside her, Prometheus, the sun, danced with fiery tongues, expanding into a scorching miniature sun. Flames, lightning, combined with Big Mom's Napoleon, capable of cleaving giant warships, three terrifying forces, each capable of easily destroying a fleet, converged from three different directions. They poured down all at once upon the still young Kaido. Where the flames passed, the air twisted, and pure gold treasures melted. As the lightning surged, arcs of electricity crackled, and the ground was scorched black. Even before the slash arrived, its sharp edge made Kaido's skin tingle with pain. At this time, Kaido was far from the monster later known as the strongest creature on land, sea, and air and immortal. Currently, although he was exceptionally talented and powerful, he was still, in essence, just a little brat in a rapid growth phase, who had not yet fully realized his potential. Facing Big Mom's furious, full-force encirclement, he felt an unprecedented threat. You've gone too far, Linlin! Kaido let out a roar, a hint of ruthlessness flashing in his eyes. His arm muscles bulged to their limit, and his spiked club danced like the wind in his hands. He pushed his observation haki to its extreme, tracking every trajectory of attack. The spiked club, carrying a shockwave, was the first to scatter the scorching pillar of fire spewed by Prometheus. Thunder Bagua Remnant! The club spun, then skillfully deflected the thick lightning bolt struck by Zeus. Finally, he twisted his body sharply, holding the spiked club horizontally in front of him, once again directly clashing with Napoleon's slash. Boom! This collision was far more powerful than the last. The specially reinforced dome of the treasure vault was completely ripped off like paper, revealing the gloomy, oppressive sky outside. At this moment, their clash also attracted the attention of other powerhouses in God Valley. All their gazes turned towards the treasure vault. Oh no! That's where the prizes are kept. Somaz, quickly go and provide support. Garen Saint saw the direction and felt a great sense of unease. He said this and then had Somaz lead some marines to rush over there. Bastards, what have you done? Garen Saint drew his sword, pointing it towards Roger and Rock's direction. His tone and eyes clearly showed his displeasure. Woo woo! Little Shanks, seeing Garen Saint draw his sword, was terrified and burrowed into Roger's arms. Shamrock also looked panicked. Teach was also startled by Garen Saint's action, fearfully snuggling into Alice's arms, trembling all over. Hey, you punk, you scared my son. Am I being too nice to you? Seeing his son scared, Rox instantly lost his temper, and the haki unique to a king instantly surged forth. Rox! Haki was very strong, even causing some marine officers to tremble. Meanwhile, at the treasure vault, the surrounding walls groaned under the violent energy impact, beginning to collapse and disintegrate over large areas. Broken bricks and stones, mixed with melted gold and jewels, splattered outwards like raindrops. You ambushing bastard! Spit out that fruit for Mama! Big Mom, through the flying dust, coldly locked onto Kaido's figure, her eyes looking at him as if he were a dead man. The more she spoke, the angrier she became, thinking of the fruit she had dreamed of, a fruit capable of changing the future power of her pirate crew, stolen by this brat before her eyes. Boundless rage transformed into tangible strength, veins bulging in her hands gripping Napoleon. The strength of her slashes grew in intensity, forcing Kaido to retreat repeatedly, deep craters continuously exploding from the ground beneath his feet. How is that even possible? Aren't you a devil fruit user too? Kaido gritted his teeth and roared lowly, while desperately fending off the storm-like attacks. He could feel the new power within him accelerating its integration, but he couldn't immediately call upon it. Linlin simply wouldn't give him any time to breathe or adapt. Each collision between his spiked club and the giant blade made his tiger's mouth numb and his internal organs churn. I don't have time to play with you anymore. Just as Big Mom parried Kaido's spiked club, and her long sword tore through the air, bringing with it immense force as it slashed down towards Kaido's head. Kaido suddenly let out a long roar to the sky. Roar! This roar shook the heavens, like an ancient, primal bellow. Accompanying this roar, an unprecedented surge of immense power boiled and surged within him. Kaido's muscles rapidly swelled, and blue scales broke through his skin, glinting with a cold, sharp light in the sunlight. Under Big Mom's horrified gaze, his massive body actually shot into the sky, stretching and circling among the clouds. When the smoke and clouds dissipated, a colossal azure dragon, obscuring the sky, lay across the heavens. Every single one of its scales shimmered with a chilling blue radiance. The winding dragon body appeared and disappeared among the flowing clouds, casting a shadow that enveloped the entire battlefield. Fish fruit, mythical Zoan, azure dragon form. Kaido was incredibly excited to see himself flying, and this scene was witnessed by the arriving Somez and a group of marines. Somez's eyes nearly popped out at the sight of the colossal creature in the sky. Some marines, seeing the legendary dragon, were so terrified that their legs trembled, and many simply sat down on the ground. Linlin, I'm running away now, bye-bye. Kaido quickly adapted to his new abilities. He shouted a challenge back at her, then began to ride the clouds and mist, heading towards the center of God Valley. Zeus, let's chase. Seeing Kaido trying to escape, Big Mom snapped out of her daze. She gnashed her teeth, called out to Zeus, and then accelerated to catch up with Kaido. Looking at Kaido's massive and powerful body, Big Mom, who was following behind, was filled with envy. Although she had a devil fruit, if this fruit were given to her children to eat, it would become a powerful asset for her pirate crew in the future. But that thought was now completely gone. Both fruits were gone. The first was eaten by a little brat, and then they ran off. The second was eaten by Kaido in an ambush. Big Mom truly got nothing. I think Big Mom was truly intent on killing him, so I described their simple battle. I wonder if you like it, Omega. Authors P.S. Big Mom definitely had killing intent towards Kaido. Later, using money and favors was out of necessity. At that time, there was no Blackbeard operation. Once a devil fruit was eaten, it was gone. Big Mom truly had no other options. If Big Mom had a way, do you think she would dissect Kaido? Chapter 16, Garen Saint chickened out? Let's continue watching the light screen. In the central plaza of God Valley, the brief calm was broken, and commotion spread through the crowd like a tide. And amidst this chaos, the shocking scene in the sky captured everyone's attention. Kaido, who had just completed his transformation into an azure dragon, was actually being chased and beaten by Big Mom, who had arrived shortly after. Blazing flames and violent lightning intertwined, illuminating the massive dragon body, making it appear both majestic and somewhat disheveled. On the battlefield below, countless eyes, both marine and pirate, simultaneously looked up at the sky. Many people's expressions froze on their faces, mouths slightly agape, their eyes filled with the same shock and disbelief that Somez had shown earlier. They gazed up at the creature that should only exist in myths, their minds reeling. Among the ranks of the true powerhouses, however, the atmosphere was completely different. They frowned, their eyes sharp as knives, staring intently at Kaido's sky-shrouding azure dragon form, each pondering the sudden, "Hey! You too, look, I have abilities too." Kaido's deep voice came from the sky, filled with uncontrollable excitement, treating this brutal battlefield as a stage for his display. "I really want to try other abilities." His words were full of fascination and a desire to explore his new power. As if sensing the complex gazes converging from below, Kaido's massive dragon head swayed slightly, and his enormous body trembled. the azure scales shimmered, and his colossal dragon body began to rapidly shrink. Amidst the swirling clouds and mist, his mountain-like figure quickly dissipated. Then he transformed back into his burly human form, landing steadily from mid-air. At this moment, Kaido's face showed none of his usual ferocity. Instead, he resembled a big child who had received a beloved toy. With pure and fervent excitement, he impatiently rushed to Rox and Whitebeard, cheerfully demonstrating, "Did you see that? This is my new power." Rox's previously tense body relaxed, and a genuine look of relief flashed in his eyes. He laughed heartily, patting Kaido's shoulder vigorously, his voice booming, "Well done, Kaido. This must be your happiest time, right? Ha 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 ha." Rox was genuinely happy for his comrade. Although Whitebeard Edward Newgate, standing beside him, did not speak, his steady gaze remained fixed on Kaido, scrutinizing him with a hint of imperceptible solemnity, as if weighing the significance behind this new power. Hey, Kaido kid," a teasing voice interjected, belonging to Golden Lion Shiki. He stroked his chin, a knowing smirk on his face, his gaze flitting between Kaido and Big Mom, who had just steadied herself in the distance. "You and Lin didn't actually go and get that, did you?" His words were deliberately drawn out, full of innuendo. Immediately, the Golden Lion's gaze sharply turned to Garp and Saint, whose face was ashen nearby, and the teasing instantly transformed into undisguised mockery. He threw his head back and roared with laughter, "Ha ha ha ha! I told you celestial dragons, have your brains been kicked by donkeys? What exactly have you been protecting? It's hilarious." This laughter was particularly jarring in the now silent battlefield. His words were like needles, precisely piercing Garp and Saint's sore spot. His wife, his child, and now even the precious devil fruit, a symbol of power, seemed to be lost. Garp and Saint's body trembled slightly, his clenched fists turning white at the knuckles. He was truly about to spit blood from anger. The Golden Lion watched his expression, laughing even more wildly and unrestrainedly, almost gasping for breath. Just at this moment of tension and mockery, Charlotte Linlein's figure, engulfed in towering rage, charged from a distance. Her pink hair whipped around due to her violent haki, and her body was wreathed in scorching solar flames and leaping lightning. The Napoleon greatsword in her hand hummed with a bloodthirsty resonance. She completely ignored all the gazes, mixed with fear and scrutiny, directed at her. Her eyes, burning with fury, were locked onto Kaido, who had just returned to human form. "Kaido! That's my devil fruit!" she roared, and a massive pressure, like a tangible tsunami, surged forward, cracking the ground beneath her feet. She raised Napoleon high, with the powers of Prometheus and Zeus converging upon it, poised to unleash a devastating attack. However, at this critical moment, above everyone's heads, the light screen that had been quietly suspended and glowing, suddenly erupted with a blinding, blood-red light without any warning. This light was so intense that it instantly engulfed everyone's vision, illuminating the entire central battlefield of God Valley like a sea of blood in hell. Buzz! An indescribable, terrifying force, accompanying the red light, suddenly descended, like an invisible giant mountain, precisely and heavily pressing down on Big Mom, who was about to launch her attack. Ugh! Big Mom's forward momentum abruptly ceased. The Napoleon greatsword, imbued with terrifying energy, seemed to strike an absolutely solid wall, emitting a dull thud. Her massive body suddenly sank, her feet deeply embedded in the ground, her knees even slightly bent. For the first time, an expression of disbelief, mixed with pain and shock, appeared on her face. The flames and lightning surrounding her also instantly dimmed and became chaotic under the suppression of this red light. A cold, mechanical voice, devoid of any emotion, as if from the heavens, yet also seemingly resounding directly in everyone's soul. It echoed clearly over the silent battlefield: killing is forbidden within the range of the light screen. One warning. Under the red light, a primal fear, stemming from the instinct of life itself, seized everyone present, causing panic and almost freezing their blood. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events, staring in horror at the ominous red glow of the light screen. No one had expected this thing, which had always been like a background prop, to suddenly display such terrifying power at this moment. At this point, Big Mom, who was the focus of the red light, had turned as pale as paper, and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. The hand clutching Napoleon, an arm capable of shaking mountains, now trembled uncontrollably. She seemed to be enduring unimaginable pressure and fear. Quickly, suppress your killing intent, Limlin. Gloriosa and Stussy warned her simultaneously. Although Big Mom was reluctant, she forcibly suppressed her inner killing intent. As expected, as soon as the killing intent was withdrawn, the oppressive feeling vanished, and the red light returned to a yellow glow. Seeing this, Garin Saint, who had been clamoring moments ago, swallowed hard. Then, under the gaze of the pirates opposite him, he put away the sword in his hand. Since the light screen was so powerful, why would he want to invite trouble? Hoo. Big Mom gasped for breath, and though her killing intent was gone, her eyes were still fixed on Kaido. Having her top-grade devil fruit stolen was an enormous humiliation. All right, everyone stop making a fuss. I just want to see what happens next in this Marineford war. Can you all be quiet for a bit? At this moment, Garp, who had been silent, stopped the farce. After seeing Ace die, Garp's mood was clearly much lower than before. Hearing Garp's words, the several major figures all nodded simultaneously. Since they couldn't fight here now, they might as well watch future developments. The tense atmosphere, on the verge of eruption, returned to calm. The light screen, as if sensing this, flashed once and then continued to switch scenes. Seeing Luffy being rescued by Jinbe, Sakazuki roared. His usually cold and resolute face was contorted by extreme rage, his eyes as red as erupting lava. You won't escape. He shrieked, the destructive energy surging within him held nothing back, completely erupting. Blazing magma surged forth with even greater ferocity, and with one punch, he brutally sent Marco, who was desperately blocking him, flying. The Phoenix's azure flames paled in comparison to this absolute power, falling like a meteor into the distance. At this moment, the path to Straw Hat seemed unobstructed. Sakazuki's eyes only saw the Straw Hat being carried away from the battlefield, and the failure of absolute justice that it symbolized. Magma surged beneath his feet, turning the earth into scorched land. He leaned forward, about to charge out at full speed with thunderous momentum, determined to completely engulf his target. However, at this critical moment, a bone-chilling killing intent, like an icy spike from the depths of hell, struck him from behind without warning. This killing intent instantly pierced through his scorching magma domain, reaching deep into his soul. Sakazuki's pupils suddenly constricted to pinpricks. It was a long-forgotten, deadly sense of threat. He could even distinctly feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end at this moment. His charging motion stiffened midway, and the magma all over his body churned violently. Almost instinctively, he sharply twisted his body, wanting to see the source of this terrifying threat. As far as his gaze could reach, it was the cold, gleaming, massive blade of Kumajiri, seemingly already pressed against his spine. And behind the blade was that figure, as towering as a mountain, Whitebeard Edward Newgate. The world's strongest man had, at some unknown moment, broken through everything like a ghost, appearing silently behind him. Whitebeard's massive body cast a shadow that completely enveloped Sakazuki. In Whitebeard's disdainful gaze, there was undisguised fury and cold killing intent. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. The above is from the manga plot, where Whitebeard directly uses an aggressive, Western-style approach, punching Akainu. The anime fully captures this sense of oppression. Sakazuki's face, twisted with rage, instantly froze, replaced by an expression of incredible shock. The magma boiling around him also seemed to momentarily congeal at this instant. His previously unstoppable, destructive momentum was abruptly interrupted and suppressed by this sudden appearance. Whitebeard, merely by standing there, exuded an oppressive presence that surpassed 1,000 armies. Chapter 17, the final swan song of the Marineford War, Blackbeard appears. At this moment in the Marineford War, the killing intent in Whitebeard's eyes had condensed to a point where even the people in God Valley watching the screen could feel it. That was not just anger, it was the pain of losing a son, the fury of being manipulated by a conspiracy, and the ultimate destruction forged when the belief in protecting family was trampled. Through the screen of light, the heroes in God Valley all felt a chill, as if an invisible cold blade had scraped past them. They collectively looked at Whitebeard, their eyes filled with complex emotions. They hadn't expected Whitebeard to possess such overwhelming pressure when truly enraged. On the screen, Whitebeard's eyes were wide with rage, the blood vessels in his brows and eyes filling his entire eyeballs. Those eyes were no longer the domineering gaze of the world's strongest man, but had transformed into those of a lion that had lost its cub, a heart-burning agony that could only be quelled by the blood of his enemy. His right fist clenched tight, and a pearly white halo instantly gathered. That was no ordinary light, it was the precursor to space itself being maximally compressed, twisted, and on the verge of bursting. Even the surrounding atmosphere let out a groan, unable to bear the burden. Humph! A low roar, sounding like a verdict from hell. Without further ado, Whitebeard's punch, imbued with monstrous rage and wrapped in shockwave capable of tearing the heavens, slammed violently toward Sakazuki, who had just managed to steady himself. In his absolute fury, Whitebeard held nothing back, and his power was absolute. Ooh! The full power of the tremor fruit was unleashed. The pearly white shockwave pressed Sakazuki to the ground. This power caused Sakazuki's pupils to shrink violently. He felt as if he wasn't facing a surge of energy, but the repulsion and compression of the entire world. Ugh! He couldn't evade it. This was not a simple physical impact, it was a terrifying force acting on the spatial level, then transmitted to his physical body. His proud magma body began to destabilize under the high-frequency, intense vibrations. His muscles, bones, and even internal organs were subjected to comprehensive, devastating compression and tearing. His body twisted and deformed bizarrely, and his sternum emitted a sickening crunch. The surrounding ground was no longer just cracking, it was pulverized into dust, as if a giant invisible hand had crushed a cracker, before collapsing into a massive, deep pit. Cracks radiated frantically outwards from Whitebeard's fist, and the entire Marineford Plaza seemed to undergo the most violent earthquake. The Marineford swayed, and the bay boiled. This was no longer a battle, it was a natural disaster, the monstrous fury of Whitebeard Edward Newgate unleashed upon Marineford. The compression of the atmosphere made Sakazuki feel as if he had been submerged 10,000 meters deep in the ocean, his internal organs nearly squeezed out of his mouth. He wanted to use elementization to evade, but the omnipresent power of the vibration interfered with everything, preventing him from executing it smoothly. Blood was not flowing out, but was being squeezed out by immense pressure from his mouth, nose, and even the corners of his eyes, staining his resolute chin red. They dripped onto the severely fractured ground, emitting a hissing sound as they evaporated. But Whitebeard had no intention of letting him off just like that. There was no trace of mercy in his bloodshot eyes, only the absolute resolve to kill. After the punch, Whitebeard's massive body displayed astonishing agility disproportionate to his size. He leaped into the air, his huge shadow instantly enveloping Sakazuki, who had temporarily lost the ability to move. On his right foot, the unsettling pearly white halo gathered again, a vibration sphere enveloping his combat boot. That kick, carrying endless rage and the power of vibration, struck Sakazuki in the deep pit like a falling meteor, BOM. This kick was no longer compression, but an explosive release. The space at the point of contact was first maximally compressed, then violently expanded and burst open. Sakazuki's body flew backward violently, like a kite with a snapped string, or a massive stone launched by a catapult, wrapped in irresistible force and scattering shockwaves. Where he passed, the air was torn apart. However, as a marine admiral possessing the magma fruit, which has the strongest offensive power, Akaina Sakazuki was not a pushover. As Whitebeard sent him flying, he quickly adjusted his posture, retaliated by launching magma fists through the dense smoke, aiming for Whitebeard. Countless magma fists struck, yet Whitebeard stubbornly refused to dodge. Even though half of his face was destroyed by the magma fists, he charged forward fearlessly toward Sakazuki. Seeing Whitebeard going too far, Sakazuki also rushed forward, intending to engage in a physical techniques fight. However, after only a few rounds, Sakazuki was tossed away by Whitebeard like a little chick, a sight that stunned him. Sakazuki had never expected that Whitebeard could so easily strike him down, even with such severe injuries. Just as Whitebeard prepared to continue using his ability, Sakazuki clenched both fists and used his ultimate move, Dark Hound. This punch landed directly into Whitebeard's existing abdominal wound. Intense agony surged, this was an attack on the body's interior. Even Whitebeard, strong as he was, suffered unprecedented severe damage, kneeling on one knee. Portgas d'Ace had been killed when Sakazuki pierced his body, and the magma destroyed his internal organs. Whitebeard had now been hit by a similar attack. Give up. Sakazuki looked at Whitebeard, who was kneeling before him. Although covered in blood, his tone was as arrogant as ever. Whitebeard's consciousness fell into a brief coma, and his chest was still burning with flames. And amidst the flames, Whitebeard saw Ace in his mind, hearing Ace calling out to him. Even though he was at the end of his rope, even though his body was severely damaged, and even though he had reached his limit, Whitebeard still reached out and tightly grabbed Sakazuki's collar, refusing to let go. As Whitebeard slowly stood up, the huge height difference allowed him to lift the adult man Sakazuki with great ease, as if he were holding a doll. Sakazuki wanted to resist, but having just used his ultimate move, his body had entered a weakened state, and he couldn't stop Whitebeard's actions. With a forceful heave, Whitebeard threw Sakazuki into the air, then his right hand activated the power of the tremor fruit again. Under Whitebeard's contemptuous gaze, he delivered a clean, square punch right onto Sakazuki. The force this time was unprecedented. Sakazuki coughed up blood incessantly, and his body felt as if it were being ripped apart. But the matter was not that simple. With this punch, not only was Sakazuki severely wounded, but the surrounding ground and even the buildings of Marineford were instantly shattered by the shock. However, this strike still didn't take Sakazuki's life. In an instant, the ground tilted, Marineford began to collapse, and Sakazuki fell into a pitch-black void. Soon after, the smoke cleared. Both the Marines and the pirates stared dumbfounded at the scene before them. At this point, Whitebeard had carved a chasm behind him that resembled an abyss. This chasm completely cut off the Marine advance, and it also isolated his figure. Next, I will be your opponent. Whitebeard slammed the komajiri in his hand forcefully into the ground. His entire being seemed to experience a temporary surge of vitality, and his fighting spirit soared again. Everyone, get back to the pirate ships. Seeing Whitebeard fighting, Marco's eyes were filled with tears. He shouted, urging the Whitebeard pirates behind him to hurry and flee. Although they were extremely reluctant, they had to obey Whitebeard's command. They couldn't let everything their old man had done be in vain. Without the Marines obstructing them, all the pirates rushed onto the pirate ships. However, everyone else left, but Marco remained still, silently watching Whitebeard's retreating figure. At this moment, Whitebeard was fighting with increasing ferocity, and just then, a wretched laugh echoed from the shadows. Just then, the melee between the two sides temporarily ceased. The Marines also noticed a huge figure hiding behind the collapsed buildings. The arrivals were none other than the Blackbeard pirates. And the owner of that laugh was Blackbeard, Marshal D. Teach, or he could also be called Davy D. Teach. Teach's two low exclamations, mixed with shock and hesitation, sounded almost simultaneously. When that familiar yet strange figure once again dominated the screen, even Rox and his wife Alice, who already knew his future fate, couldn't help but freeze. Although they knew this was a depiction of the distant future, witnessing that completely unfamiliar son again with their own eyes, profound complexity still uncontrollably surfaced on both their faces. Alice subconsciously tightened her arms around little Teach, as if trying to find evidence on the warm, tiny body in her embrace that was completely different from the madman in the future. Rock's gaze was sharp as an eagle's, scrutinizing the face on the screen, a face twisted by ambition, yet vaguely bearing his own contours. Rox, your son's face shape is like yours, but this layer of fat. Golden Lion Shiki, standing nearby with his arms crossed, clicked his tongue, his tone carrying unconcealed disdain. Compared to your formidable appearance, he's miles away. He has absolutely no imposing presence. Golden Lion's gaze fixed on Teach, and an inexplicable yet intense feeling of displeasure surged in his heart. This feeling might stem from Teach's treacherous style of enduring for years only to stab others in the back, which was completely incompatible with Shiki's preferred tyrannical and ostentatious behavior. Or perhaps, simply seeing a face so similar to Rock's, yet committing so many despicable acts, made him feel irritated. However, Shiki clearly confined this pure disgust to the Blackbeard on the screen. He glanced at the innocent, babbling little Teach in Alice's arms, gave a cold snort, and said no more. Even if Shiki was arrogant, he wouldn't take his anger out on a child. Wah! Just then, little Shanks, held in Roger's arms, suddenly became agitated. He waved his chubby little hands, his rosy cheeks flushed crimson. His bright eyes stared intently at Teach on the screen, letting out urgent and distressed cries, as if instinctively feeling immense repulsion and disgust toward that figure. This extraordinary reaction caused Roger to look down at the little guy in his arms, then look up at the screen, a hint of contemplation flashing across his rugged brow. Ambitious, yet disgusting. Charlotte Lin, who had been observing silently, licked her lips. Her evaluation was direct and cruel. That viciousness towards comrades, even I feel ashamed of myself by comparison, mama. Her laughter carried a subtle hint of fear and contempt. Relying on plundering comrades' devil fruit abilities to gain power is ultimately an inferior method. Rayleigh and Jabba commented in deep voices, their tones full of disdain for Teach's principles of conduct. Teach, what exactly does he intend to do? Rox finally stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Whitebeard. He shifted his profound gaze from his youngest son and cast it back toward the screen reflecting the future, his brow furrowed as if attempting to pierce through time and space to see into the depths of the heart of this son named Marshall D. Teach. The screen had previously reported on Teach, so Rox had seen his son's name. Although the different surname surprised him, Rox quickly let it go. Roger's son didn't share his surname either. But now, it seemed, Rox was even more certain that his future self was dead. Yet Rox still didn't understand what astonishing scheme his son was hiding, and where that scheme would ultimately lead him, and the entire era. The young Whitebeard stood beside Rox, his massive body emanating silence. The two overlords of an era were now plunged into heavy silence because of the future of the same son. Chapter 18 Rox, don't take your anger out on a child. The sudden appearance of Blackbeard was like a giant boulder thrown into an already turbulent battlefield, instantly stirring up everyone's emotions. Sengoku, standing below, suddenly furrowed his brow, a flicker of surprise flashing in his sharp eyes that saw through the battle situation. When his gaze swept over the group of pirates beside Teach, who were varied in appearance but all exuded a dangerous aura, the fleet admiral's expression became unprecedentedly solemn. That colossal shadow, towering like a mountain, was precisely San Juan Wolf, known as the San Juan Wolf. With every step he took, the earth trembled slightly, as if even the air grew thin due to his presence. Even more alarming was the face of Abalo Pizarro, the evil king, which was etched with arrogance and cruelty, now wearing a half-smile. And Katarina Devon, known as the Crescent Moon Hunter, had bloodthirsty light flickering in her bewitching eyes. Vasco Shot, the heavy drinker, shook his iconic liquor gourd in his hand, his hazy, drunken eyes concealing murderous intent. What made Sengoku most uneasy was the familiar figure standing beside Blackbeard, Shiryu of the Rain, the former head jailer of Impel Down. This man's betrayal meant that Blackbeard had gained control of Impel Down's most fatal secrets. When Whitebeard clearly saw the face of the newcomer, an unprecedented rage ignited in his weathered eyes. This fury was more chilling than when Whitebeard confronted Sakazuki earlier. Marco and the others clearly felt Whitebeard's body trembling slightly, not from injury, but from the deepest pain and rage within his heart. Under the effect of the tremor fruit ability, the air began to emit a low hum, as if the entire world was responding to Whitebeard's emotional turmoil. Only you, Whitebeard's voice was deep and dangerous, like the final calm before a storm. Only you are unworthy to be my son. This sentence was squeezed out from between his teeth, carrying deep-seated grief and indignation. Whitebeard slowly raised the fist that had once shaken the world, visible tremor waves gathered and compressed on his fist, finally transforming into a world-destroying shockwave. Boom! The power of the tremor fruit was displayed perfectly at this moment. Wherever the shockwave passed, the sturdy execution platform began to crack, sending debris flying. The members of the Blackbeard pirates standing on the high platform were caught off guard and fell from the collapsing structure amidst screams. Blackbeard crashed heavily onto the ground. Pizarro, even while falling, tried to maintain his sickeningly elegant posture. Devon let out a sharp curse. Shot's liquor. Gourd traced an arc in the air, scattering liquor. You violated the only iron rule on the ship. Whitebeard's voice boomed like thunder, echoing in every corner of the battlefield. Every member of the Whitebeard pirates was shaken by this roar filled with anguish. They knew too well the weight of this iron rule. In this pirate crew, where they called each other family, harming a comrade was an unforgivable felony. Blackbeard struggled to his feet in the rubble, still sporting that repulsive, maniacal laugh. Zehahaha. Old man, the times have changed. His laughter carried bone-chilling ambition. The current me has obtained the power to change the world. Sengoku watched all this with cold eyes, rapidly analyzing Blackbeard's objective for this trip. Was he here to reap the spoils? Or did he have another agenda? This man's appearance made the already complicated battle situation even more confusing. What worried him more was that every one of the criminals gathered around Blackbeard possessed terrifying strength sufficient to stand alone. Their inclusion could very well become the final straw that breaks the back of this war. Whitebeard endured the pain of his injuries and advanced step by step. With every step he took, the earth responded to his rage. His magnificent figure flickered in and out of the smoke, like a deity marching toward the final judgment. Thatch's revenge, Whitebeard's deep voice echoed across the battlefield. And the dignity of all the family members you betrayed, today, I will personally reclaim it. At this moment, all of Marineford held its breath. Everyone realized that the direction of this war would undergo unpredictable changes due to Blackbeard's appearance. And this destined confrontation between Whitebeard and Blackbeard was fated to leave the most indelible mark on this battlefield soaked in blood. Marco spread his wings, and azure phoenix flames shot into the sky. Just as he was about to flap his wings and cross the bottomless ravine, Whitebeard's angry shout exploded like thunder. No one is allowed to interfere. This command was brief and resolute, its meaning self-evident. Marco's wings froze in mid-air, the phoenix flames flickering between his feathers. He looked toward Whitebeard's magnificent back, finally landing slowly, choosing to obey his father's will. Say ha ha ha. Blackbeard's laughter echoed through the ruins, filled with disgusting smugness. Old man, I truly respected you once. But you are old now, too old to even save your own subordinates. He spread his arms, and thick darkness surged out from his body, consuming the earth like ink soaking into paper. Wherever the darkness reached, even the light seemed to be swallowed. Whitebeard's body began to sink. The boots that had once trampled countless battlefields were now slowly being consumed by the endless darkness. I even deliberately spared Ace's life. Teach continued to rant, the fat on his face contorted by his maniacal laughter. Whitebeard attempted to activate the power of the tremor fruit, but the moment the darkness touched him, he felt an unprecedented powerlessness. The darkness was like a bottomless abyss, absorbing all his power. Just then, Teach's heavy punch slammed hard onto the wound on his chest. The intense pain made Whitebeard let out a muffled groan. He swung his fist again, but it was still swallowed by the darkness. Even Murakumajiri, which had accompanied him through years of battle, flew out of his hand for the first time, tracing a powerless arc in the air. However, how could the legend of this sea yield so easily? Just as Teach was carried away by his triumph, Whitebeard endured the intense pain and reached out to steadily catch the falling Murakumajiri. A flash of the blade, and the sharp edge solidly cleaved into Teach's shoulder. Blood immediately gushed out. The situation instantly reversed. Whitebeard's massive hand gripped Teach's throat, pinning the arrogant traitor firmly to the ground. Teach, who had been so arrogant just moments before, was now struggling futilely like a chicken whose neck had been squeezed. Overconfidence, carelessness, these are your weaknesses. Whitebeard's voice was like a judgment from the abyss. Stop. Old man. Spare me. Teach began to fear, began to beg for mercy, his appearance utterly hideous. But there was not the slightest wavering in Whitebeard's eyes. The tremor waves in his hand condensed once more. This time, he intended to seek justice for all the family members who had been betrayed. Rumble. The second display of the tremor fruit's power made the entire island tremble, and the earth cracked into countless bottomless ravines. Just when everyone thought the outcome was decided, as the smoke and dust cleared, Teach was still alive. Meanwhile, Whitebeard, the man who had once been unbeatable, finally suffered a fatal pause in his movements due to his severe injuries. Whitebeard's body began to glow red, as if every muscle fiber was burning his last remaining life force. He advanced step by step, each step leaving a bloody footprint on the ground. His right fist was raised again. This time, he swore to end the traitor's life. However, bang! A gunshot pierced the sky. No one expected that Teach would pull a flintlock pistol from his clothes and aim it at Whitebeard. That despicable bullet brought Whitebeard's impending fatal strike to an abrupt halt. Shoot! All of you, shoot him! Teach roared hoarsely. In an instant, bullets poured down like rain. Every member of the Blackbeard pirates raised their weapons, and the flashes of blades and gunfire wove a net of death. Bullets pierced his magnificent body, blades tore his solid arms, and blood bloomed beneath his feet like opening red lotuses. The gunfire lasted for a full minute. When the final gunshot faded into the smoke, Whitebeard still stood tall. But his body was riddled with holes. The sea wind wailed as it swept. Across the battlefield, carrying a scent of blood, the greatest pirate of this era stood now like a weathered monument, still proudly erect despite being covered in wounds. Whitebeard's eyes, which had always gazed into the distance, never closed, even at this final moment. Rocks, watching the light screen, suddenly turned his head. His broad chest heaved violently, and his eyes, which had once struck terror into countless pirates, were now filled with unspeakable pain. Teach, what in the world are you doing? This roar sounded as if it were ripped from the depths of his soul. Rock's gaze was fixed on the small boy curled up in his wife's arms in the corner. Rage and incomprehension intertwined into a surging vortex in his eyes. Rage, because although Rox had committed numerous atrocities throughout his life, he had always maintained a sliver of basic human decency. Incomprehension, because he could not understand how his own bloodline could have fallen to such depths. I pillaged, I slaughtered, but I never betrayed or harmed my friends. Rock's voice trembled with agitation. But you actually, wah! Young Teach cried loudly, terrified by his father's fierce expression, burying his small face in his mother Alice's clothes, his tiny shoulders shaking nonstop. No one could connect this timid appearance with the heinous Blackbeard of the future. Enough, Rox! Just as Rox was about to continue his outburst, a calm voice interrupted him. It was Whitebeard who spoke, his gaze complex and hard to decipher at the moment. Looking at his tragic end on the screen, and then at the innocent child before him, he slowly shook his head. Don't take your anger out on a child. What does he understand right now? Whitebeard's voice carried an undisguised weariness, yet still maintained his characteristic magnanimity. Although he had witnessed his own tragic future outcome, he could still distinguish right from wrong. What did any of this have to do with the trembling child before him? Alice tightly embraced the young Teach in her arms, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. She gently stroked the child's back, her gaze shifting between her husband and the screen, finally resting on Whitebeard, her eyes filled with gratitude. Rox regained his senses. He picked up young Teach and began to apologize, though his heart remained extremely complicated. He looked at the figure still standing tall in the hail of bullets on the screen, then glanced at his sobbing son, and finally closed his eyes in pain. Only the intermittent sobs of young Teach echoed. At this moment, everyone fell into contemplation about the capriciousness of fate, the weight of choices, and what kind of distortion a child must experience to become the person they saw in the future. Whitebeard sighed deeply, a hint of imperceptible pity flashing in the eyes that had witnessed countless joys and sorrows. Even when facing the childhood version of the enemy who betrayed him, this man, whose heart was as vast as the sea, ultimately could not bring himself to lash out at an innocent child. Chapter 19, Roger's True Name, The Clan of D. The scene on the light screen continued. Whitebeard's massive body swayed slightly amidst a hail of gunfire, blood blooming like red spider lilies. It spread wantonly across his skin. His iconic crescent mustache was stained with blood, but his eyes remained sharp as knives, fixed on the cackling Blackbeard in the distance. The air in God Valley seemed to freeze. Everyone's heart felt heavy. What an ugly way to die. Kaido's deep voice broke the silence. Veins bulged on the hand clutching his spiked club. Even an enemy shouldn't be treated like that. Charlotte Lin, uncharacteristically, didn't let out her signature laugh. Her expression was complex. Newgate, is this your end? On the Roger pirate's side, Rayleigh silently pushed up his glasses, while Jabba spat forcefully. Roger himself frowned deeply, his fists unconsciously clenching. And the young Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, standing beside Rox, was unusually calm at this moment. He simply watched his aged self on the light screen, his eyes devoid of both anger and sadness. "Hey, Newgate, do you really not care? Otherwise, kill him now." Golden Lion Shiki couldn't help but ask, his brows furrowed. Although his relationship with Whitebeard wasn't particularly close, seeing the elderly Whitebeard suffer such humiliation, he felt extremely indignant. "That bastard kid is the reason you ended up like this." Whitebeard turned his head, his gaze falling on the ignorant, black-haired infant in Rock's arms. Little Teach was clenching his fingers, his big eyes curiously observing the world around him. "Who can say for sure what the future holds?" Whitebeard spoke slowly, his voice deep and powerful. "But for now, he's just a child who needs protection." Rox looked down at the son in his arms, his eyes complex. As a father, how could he harm his own flesh and blood? Yet, the Blackbeard on the light screen, who betrayed everything and caused the death of his closest comrade, made his heart ache. Alice clutched her husband's arm tightly, tears welling in her eyes. As a mother, she absolutely could not accept anyone harming her child. "But Newgate," Rox spoke with difficulty, "if Teach really turns out like that." Whitebeard strode over to Rox, extended his large, calloused hand, and gently stroked little Teach's cheek. Teach giggled, his small hand grasping one of Whitebeard's fingers. "Listen, Rox." Whitebeard looked up, his gaze firm. "Everyone has their own choices. The future Teach chose his path, and I chose mine. This isn't anyone's fault, it's just fate's arrangement." Whitebeard paused, then looked around. "If you stifle an innocent young life now just because you saw a future tragedy, then you truly underestimate me, Newgate." Hearing these words, Garen Saint sneered from nearby. "What touching words, Whitebeard. But when you're truly killed by your precious son, I hope you can still think that way." Whitebeard didn't even turn to look at Garen Saint, merely stating, "At least I will never regret today's choice." Rox looked at the infant in his arms, then at the unyielding Whitebeard on the light screen, and finally made up his mind. He took a deep breath and handed little Teach to Alice. "You're right, Newgate." Rock's voice regained its usual authority. "Who says the future can't be changed? I will teach this child well, guide him onto a different path, and at least ensure he doesn't become a scoundrel." Alice held the child tightly, looking at Whitebeard with gratitude once more. This man had arguably saved Teach's life twice. If not for his intervention, Rox might truly have killed Teach. Golden Lion Shiki shrugged in the air. "Suit yourselves, it's not me who'll be killed anyway." Despite his words, his gaze never left Whitebeard on the light screen. Perhaps deep down, even someone like Golden Lion had to admit, some things are more important than life itself. Little Teach slept peacefully in his mother's arms, completely unaware of the role he would play in his future destiny. And at this moment, he was just an ordinary infant, loved by his parents and protected by the strong. Perhaps, this was what Whitebeard most wanted to see. To give everyone a chance to choose, no matter where that choice might ultimately lead. The earth-shattering sound of cannon fire and battle cries seemed to be muted at that moment. Everyone in God Valley, whether they were powerful figures dominating the seas or Marines and God's Knights upholding order, was drawn to the sudden, tranquil scene on the light screen. Kaido's thunderous exclamation became the only sound to break the momentary silence. "Look! Is that Roger?" On the light screen, there was no longer a brutal battlefield or a tragic Whitebeard, but a scene like a paradise. Pink and white cherry blossoms drifted silently like snow. Beneath a giant cherry tree, two men sat facing each other. One of them was Whitebeard in his youth, his brilliant golden hair shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the blossoms, his face not yet etched with the furrows of time, only the sharpness and untamed spirit of a strong man. And the man sitting opposite him, with a hearty laugh, who else could it be but Roger? Pfft, ha 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 ha. Below the light screen, the young Roger himself couldn't help but burst into laughter, pointing at his own grizzled, wrinkled-eyed image on the screen, doubling over with mirth. I'll look like that in the future? Rayleigh, Jabba, look, the butcher's knife of time has been too unkind to me. Despite his words, Roger stroked his chin and observed carefully for a moment, a hint of understanding and acceptance appearing in his eyes. But then again, looking closely, this weathered look actually has quite a charm. Yes. Roger, you're always the most handsome. Gloriosa, at this moment, completely disregarded their opposing factions, directly went up and hugged Roger's arm, looking at him with infatuated eyes. Indeed, he was the man she had her eyes on. Even when he was old, he was still so handsome. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Gloriosa loved Roger to no end. No matter what Roger looked like, he was the most handsome to her. In the light screen, the middle-aged Roger picked up the wine bowl in front of him, took a hearty gulp, and then, with a playful glint in his eye, looked at the young Whitebeard. Newgate, how about it? Want me to tell you how to get to Raftel? Roger's tone was casual, as if he were discussing the weather, but the content of his words was enough to drive the entire sea at that time into a frenzy. However, the young Whitebeard simply took a generous swig of sake, casually wiped the wine from the corner of his mouth, his expression calm, even with a hint of disdain. Forget it. Roger. Even if I knew, I wouldn't go. I have no interest in such things. Their conversation was relaxed and natural, like old friends of many years, completely unlike the tense rivalry rumored by the outside world. They talked about the sea, about dreams, the clear sake in their bowls reflecting the swaying shadows of the cherry tree. Suddenly, Roger seemed to recall something amusing and asked with a smile, "Hey, Newgate, do you know what the guys on the sea call me now?" "Gold Roger." Whitebeard replied casually, not paying much attention. Roger's smile deepened, carrying an indescribable meaning. He leaned forward slightly, his voice not loud, yet it clearly penetrated the light screen, spreading throughout God Valley. "Actually, my real name is Gold Roger." Exclamation point. D? A simple letter, yet it was like a silent thunderclap, suddenly echoing through God Valley. Garp Saint, who had previously watched with a somewhat amused expression, his pupils suddenly contracted, his relaxed demeanor instantly replaced by confusion. After the confusion, the chilling aura erupting from him seemed to freeze the surrounding air. Members of the Gods' Knights almost simultaneously gripped their sword hilts, their sharp gazes collectively locking onto Roger beneath the light screen. That look was no longer the scrutiny of a troublesome pirate, but the resolute determination to eliminate a forbidden entity. And behind them, those celestial dragons, hearing the name D, instantly became panicked, as if greatly fearing that name. The Clan of D. Garp Saint's voice was like something pulled from an ice cellar, carrying a chilling coldness. Indeed. Roger, you are also of that sinful bloodline. The Marine camp was also in an uproar. The generals exchanged glances. Clearly the impact of this information far exceeded their imagination. Garp looked at Roger, his eyes becoming extremely solemn. On the Rock's pirate side, the atmosphere was equally subtle. A flicker of surprise crossed Rock's eyes, and an almost imperceptible curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. He seemed not surprised by this, yet also seemed to be connecting more dots. Roger's companions seemed to have known this name for a long time, not showing much surprise. And Roger, at the center of the storm, facing countless gazes of shock, murderous intent, or inquiry, merely nonchalantly picked his ear and grinned. On the light screen, cherry blossoms continued to fall, and the two men drinking and chatting seemed unaware. The utterance of a single name had already stirred up a tempest in another time in the past. Chapter 20, Whitebeard dies in battle. His dying words terrify Sengoku? The scene on the light screen rippled like water, and the sight of them drinking happily under the cherry blossom tree gradually faded. The secret conversation about the will of D ultimately remained unheard by the people of God Valley. This fleeting glimpse of memory abruptly ended, and the scene violently switched back to the incomparably brutal Marineford battlefield. Smoke filled the air, and corpses lay everywhere. The Blackbeard pirates' gun barrels were hot and their magazines empty. They watched, with victorious sneers, the figure who stood like a mountain but was riddled with holes. Everyone thought that after enduring so many fatal injuries and such a massive outpouring of ammunition, Whitebeard's life had reached its end. A deadly silence permeated the battlefield. However, amidst this silence, the giant, who was thought to be certainly dead, let out a low, hoarse sound from his throat. He first gave a slow, incredibly complex look at Marshal D. Teach, the unfilial son who had committed patricide, a gaze perhaps filled with grief, disappointment, and a myriad of other emotions. Immediately after, Whitebeard raised his unyielding head, his gaze cutting through the chaotic crowd to precisely lock onto Fleet Admiral Sengoku. "It's not you." Although Whitebeard's voice was weak, it carried a certainty that pierced through time and space. "The person Roger is waiting for is definitely not you." As soon as the words left his mouth, astonishment seized all sides. Marines, pirates, everyone was stunned by this sudden, inexplicable statement. Who could have imagined that a man whose heart should have stopped beating could still utter such a bewildering assertion? Whitebeard ignored the surrounding astonishment. He seemed not to be stating a fact, but announcing a predestined future. Blood constantly spilled from the corner of his mouth, yet his expression was unusually calm, like the deep sea after a storm. "Just as there is someone who can inherit Roger's will." His voice resonated in everyone's ears like the tolling of an ancient bell. "One day, someone who inherits aces will also appear." Whitebeard paused, and in his lion-like eyes, flames seemed to burn, the unquenchable fire of will. Even if the bloodline is severed, their flame will never be extinguished. It will be passed down continuously like kindling, and one day in the future, they will be able to shoulder these hundreds of years of history. His voice suddenly rose, carrying the weight of shaking the world. "The one who will challenge this world will appear." Put. Another large mouthful of blood sprayed out, staining his grizzled crescent mustache red. Yet, Whitebeard's body remained ramrod straight, as if no power in the world could make him bend. He stared at the ashen-faced Sengoku, every word like a heavy hammer striking the hearts of the Marines and the world government. "Sengoku, what you, the world government, fear? That great war that will eventually come and sweep across the entire world. Although I have no interest in that thing, when that treasure is discovered, the world will surely be turned upside down." His words were like a prophecy, or rather, a curse. "Someone will surely find it. That day will definitely come." Saying this, Whitebeard smiled. That smile, unlike Blackbeard's madness, was one of immense relief and grandeur, seeing through the past and foreseeing the future. But in Sengoku's eyes, this smile was more terrifying than any attack, for it represented a hope and a will that could not be extinguished. And at this moment, the people outside the light screen seemed to experience an illusion. Beside Whitebeard's magnificent body, a hardy figure seemed to quietly appear. It was the shadow of Garp and Roger. The overlords of the era, at this moment, their wills transcended the boundary of life and death and resonated with each other. One piece. Whitebeard used the last reserves of his life force, slammed Murakumajiri heavily onto the ground, looked up to the sky, and let out a heaven-shaking roar that echoed through every corner of the world. "Is real." The Sea Emperor's final declaration, like a massive bell tolling for the last time, announced it to the world. At this moment, on Marineford Plaza, everyone, Marines and pirates alike, was dumbfounded and stunned. The entire world seemed to fall into a brief state of stagnation and deadly silence before this dying declaration. And in God Valley, the silence was also deafening. Whether they were people on the Marineford battlefield or those watching the War of the Century broadcast via Den Den Mushi, their hearts were fiercely clenched at this moment. "You bastard!" Fleet Admiral Sengoku completely lost his composure. His carefully planned execution strategy, designed to intimidate the seas and end the great pirate era started by Roger, was now forcefully reversed by Whitebeard, who staked his life on it. Whitebeard not only proved with his actions that the era has not ended, but he also used these final words to ignite the most dazzling beacon for the next magnificent era. The strategist's composure and planning vanished in that instant. Like an enraged tiger, he let out a heartbroken roar toward that magnificent, now silent body. However, Whitebeard could no longer hear him. "Zay ha 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 ha." In stark contrast was the grating laughter of Marshal D. Teach, mixed with madness, excitement, exhilaration, and unspeakable ambition. He spread his arms, as if to embrace the world that Whitebeard had personally pushed toward a wilder future. Whitebeard's death cleared the biggest obstacle for him, and this dying declaration paved a golden route to the ultimate treasure for him and countless others who rushed toward the sea with dreams or ambition. He won the gamble. The power he stole and the righteousness he trampled upon seemed worth it at this moment. Outside the light screen, the people of God Valley held their breath. They saw Whitebeard's weather-beaten face, his wide, angry eyes slowly and peacefully closing. He could not hear Sengoku's furious shouts, nor did he heed Teach's maniacal laughter. In his final moments of consciousness, he entered a realm of tranquility belonging only to himself. That was his farewell to his family. My sons. Forgive me, your inadequate father. Forgive me for leaving behind Teach, this unforgivable bastard. Whitebeard's thoughts swept past face after vivid face, Marco's phoenix flame, Ace's burning fire fist, Josu's solid diamond wall, Vista's dancing rose sword, his noisy children who loved and respected him. From you all, I received everything. Kinship, warmth, attachment, the belonging of a home, these things he yearned for but could not obtain in his youth, he found on the sea and used them to build a massive family. I have reached my end. There was no regret, only deep attachment and relief. He completed his mission as a father, protecting his children, though not entirely successfully, and fulfilled his definition of the pirate name in the most glorious way. Thump. A faint, almost imperceptible sound of a heartbeat ceasing symbolized the complete extinction of the flame of life. Edward Newgate deceased. The world's strongest man ultimately could not defeat the passage of time and the rule of death. However, his massive body still stood towering like a mountain. He gripped his beloved Naginata, Murakumajiri, using it as a support. Even though his breath was gone and his soul had departed, his straight spine never bent an inch. His proud figure seemed even more majestic and unshakable than the ruined Marineford headquarters building behind him. It truly was a long journey. As if responding to this silent sigh, the light screen began to flash back through Whitebeard's magnificent life at astonishing speed. The scenes flowed. It was a town ravaged by war, a thin boy looking up at the barren land in the gray sky, his eyes nonetheless sparkling with curiosity and longing for the world beyond the sea. That was his first time setting sail, sitting at the bow of a simple small boat, the sea breeze ruffling his dazzling golden hair, his face showing the boldness of a newborn calf unafraid of a tiger. Later, his strength grew, and the name Whitebeard began to echo across the seas, contending with powerhouses like Roger and Shiki, overwhelming everything like a tiger swallowing 10,000 miles. He sat enthroned on the massive whale figurehead of the Moby Dick, and behind him, from being empty, gradually gathered a group of sons who adored and followed him. That was a feast on the Moby Dick, cups clinking, laughter shaking the heavens, his family gathered around, listening to him recount past adventures and sharing their dreams. He sat in the main seat, watching the lively scene before him, a satisfied and peaceful smile on his lips. He had gained what he sought his entire life, a true, warm, and vast family. Edward Newgate deceased. The cold declaration reappeared, forming a cruel yet magnificent contrast with the life that flashed before them. Though dead, his body was unyielding. His scarred yet still upright posture, and his proud spirit that fought against tens of thousands of enemies until the very last moment, were branded forever onto Marineford Plaza like the deepest mark. And in the hearts of everyone who witnessed this scene. The light screen began ruthlessly listing the shocking data. Every number was a tragic song of bravery and resilience. Sword wounds, totaling 267. Gunshot wounds, totaling 152. Cannonball wounds, totaling 46. Yet, despite sustaining damage sufficient to annihilate an entire army, his silhouette remained that of a giant supporting the heavens. Image filled with a majesty and pride that dared not be looked upon directly. Until the end of his life, he remained worthy of the title world's strongest man. Or rather, looking back at his entire career as a pirate, no matter how desperate the situation, the words flee and shame were never in his dictionary. Just then, a sea breeze blew past. The knot of his iconic white captain's cloak finally snapped, and it slowly slid from his broad shoulders, drifting down to cover the ground at his feet. Beneath the cloak, his solid back was fully revealed. There was not a single scar. This was the pride of his entire life. He had never turned his back on an enemy in battle, never retreated. Even more eye-catching was the massive, vivid tattoo on his back. That was the skull symbol representing the Whitebeard pirates. Behind the crossed bones was the crescent mustache design he protected his entire life. This was Edward Newgate. This was Whitebeard. He died standing, his symbol at his back, facing the tide of the entire world. He used the most manly way possible to draw a stirring conclusion to his legendary life. An era completely ended with his collapse, even though his body did not fall. But the sparks he sowed and the truth he proclaimed are destined to ignite an even fiercer conflagration across these turbulent seas. Sending a wave of gifts. Thank you, esteemed patrons. That's it for today. Meet you in next part. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel grow. Your support means everything, so hit that button and